All right, so good morning. So today, where we left off on last week was talking about appraisals, right? That's the unit that we're in, real estate appraisal. And we left off having a discussion about the sales comparison approach and starting on the cost approach. So that's where we're at right now. And so we want to continue on this wonderful track. So what we had talked about is the 5 steps when we discuss the cost approach. So the first thing that we discussed was the estimating the value of the land as though it were vacant. So when we talk about, okay, well, the value of land as though it were vacant, why does anyone remember, why do we separate the land from the building?
Land doesn't lose its value.
Well, the land, right, and you are correct in a roundabout way, the land does not depreciate, right? So when we talk about land, remember, we say that it's indestructible and that it's not man-made or human-made, and so that the land does not depreciate. And so then we're going to discuss, okay, the appraisers will estimate the current cost of constructing, building, and improvements. They will estimate the amount of accrued depreciation. That's how much was the loss in value resulting from the property's physical deterioration, external depreciation, and functional obsolescence. So we will discuss what those terms mean in a few minutes. And then we will deduct the accrued depreciation from step 3 and add in the estimated land value for us to figure out, okay, what is the value by cost approach? So let's talk about some of these different depreciation ideas, which is really where we kind of left off last time. So remember, depreciation is the result of something that's usually negative type of wear and tear. Sometimes it's a lot more than that, that affects the real property. So the first one that we have is called physical deterioration. So who knows what is physical deterioration? What would be an example of physical deterioration?
Roof gets old after a period of time, right?
Right.
I
So
was gonna say like the concrete, no?
would we consider physical deterioration, would we consider that to be curable? And when we say curable, we're talking about, can it be corrected economically? Can it be corrected in a manner that's worth it, that's worth the money? So like, for instance, a roof, would that be considered curable?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Painting, right? Would that be considered curable? Doing, maybe installing a new furnace or boiler, yes, right? So those are things, a curable. Physical deterioration is a curable item. One in need of repair, might be some sort of deferred maintenance, right? If it's not taken care of, things can get a lot worse. Maybe you have, like an example they use in your book, there's a crack in the foundation and you don't do anything about it. And over the years, what's going to happen to that crack? Right? It's just going to get worse and worse and worse, right? And so usually with physical deterioration, the cost of the repair, most of the time it will be worth it, but once in a while it may not warrant the financial investment, depending. So like an example is, I'm trying to think of, so someone had built a deck over a someone had built a deck over the basement hatchway, and they felt like they wanted to make it so that they can get into the hatchway to be able to get into the basement easy, right? Well, once that deck is built in the way that it was built, it probably wouldn't be worth it, to try to get into the hatchway from that particular area. And so they had to result to just being able to get into the basement from the house. It was kind of a matter of opinion as to whether it was worth it or not for them to try to do that sort of thing, right? Now, functional obsolescence basically means that it's a loss in value from the market's response to the item. Okay. The market's response. So it's not necessarily something that has happened to the property. it's something that the market, the way that they feel about it, what buyers feel about it, will affect the value of the property. So an example, in today's world, do they build a lot of small bedrooms? Do people like small bedrooms? Do people want small bedrooms? No, right? But if you look at a lot of homes that were built, let's just say in the 1800s or early 1900s, many of the times the bedrooms are small. They didn't need, they weren't going to the furniture stores that we're going to today, where you have all the biggest furniture out there, right? Basically, that's kind of like an acceptable design feature, is to have a small bedroom is unacceptable, or to have a bathroom like directly off of the kitchen. I mean, if you go into a lot of multifamily homes, you will see the bathroom right there, right off the kitchen. Like you could be sitting at the kitchen table and you can turn to your right and you can look into the bathroom, right? And so in today's world, that's kind of a design feature that's not considered to be desirable. And so does that affect the value of the property? Yes, right? Maybe with the type of electricity that's being used, as far as number of outlets per room. Now, of course, there's certain codes, but there's still, if you had a room with only one outlet, could you buy it? Yes. But are you going to be looking at it like, oh my gosh, I got to redo the electric here, or this bathroom doesn't have an outlet for the blow dryer or for my electronic toothbrush thing that I have, which I don't have one of those, but I was always thinking that they look kind of cool, right? Who has some examples of other things that would be considered functional obsolescence?
A formal dining room.
Yeah, I mean, some people, well, I'll actually take it to this way. I think it's more of like a formal living room. Like in today's world,
Yeah.
most people don't care for, or it's not very important at all, a formal living room. Some people still want formal dining rooms, some people don't. Me particularly, I love to have a formal dining room, okay? Because I like to sit down with my family and have some food, right? But a formal living room, I don't know, it just always felt like an extra room, and why do you even have it? So you can have a little museum room in your house, right? So it depends, right? It depends on how you feel about it. Is it really important to you or not? Anybody else have some ideas about functional obsolescence? What else in today's market response to certain things? Like, how about metal cabinets? Does everyone like metal cabinets in their kitchen? Who likes metal cabinets in their kitchen? Anyone? Going one, going two, right? So, but think about, like, I don't know, I'm kind of guesstimating in the 50s, they had metal cabinets in their kitchen, right? So that would be an example of functional obsolescence. Now, the third one is called external obsolescence. So when you think of the word external, right, what are we talking about?
Outside.
Outside, right? So basically, this depreciation is caused by negative factors on the outside, not on the subject property, but maybe environmental, something outside, social, economic, and these things are incurable because you have no control over them, right? You have no control over them. You cannot, let's say, reverse the loss in value by spending money on it, right? You can't say, well, if I spend all this money, I can fix it and it will be curable. So they say that external obsolescence, these types of factors are incurable. So what would be an example of something that's external obsolescence?
A waste company next door.
Yeah. So, let's say you buy a house and all of a sudden you find out, and maybe you have a little bit of woods behind your house, and you find out right on the other side of those woods, they're putting a waste factory. Right? They're going to burn tires. Aren't you going to love that one? Right? Is it going to help out the value of your property when it smells like burnt tires every day? Right? So that would be an example of external obsolescence. Okay. So again, what we're trying to think about is number one, how much is the property worth if you were to rebuild it? Right. And so the way that I kind of look at some of these things is we say, okay, well, here's the building. And so this property may have like they give you an example in your book. For instance, a $420,000 property may have a land value of $90,000 and an improvement value of $330,000. So if the improvement is expected to last 60 years, you're going to divide that. So you're going to divide 330,000 divided by 60 years, which gives you an annual straight line depreciation of $5,500. So what does that mean? That every year that the property, becomes 1 year older that you own it, you would have this depreciation of $5,500, which from an accounting standpoint, you might like, because that's less capital gains for you, right? But from an appraisal value, this is how we look at it when we're talking about properties that are difficult to appraise, because there's very little local sales, there's very little comparables, and the properties don't generate enough income, right? So what kind of questions do you have about the cost approach?
How often do you run into this in a normal, say, month? I know they don't come up all the time, but.
Right. So, I mean, kind of think about it this way. From a real estate agent perspective, it's just like a little bit good to know, to be familiar. Once in a while, you don't even get it every single time. Once in a while, you might get a copy of someone's appraisal and you might look at it. Now, 90-something% of the time, you're going to be looking at the sales comparison approach anyways. But if you're involved in commercial a little bit like I do, you might look at this and you might wonder, okay, so let me see how they calculate it this way, and does it make sense? And so then you'll become a little bit familiar with it. But this is really more of, they call it, how do you say it, niche, right? This is more of like a niche where you think about for commercial and what certain real estate brokers and what appraisers are doing. You really won't be involved with this on kind of like a daily basis, right? Does that make sense to everyone? All right. So the third one is the income approach, right? And basically, we're going to be looking at, okay, based upon the present value of the right to the future income of the property. That's how the value is based. The present value of the right to future income. So it assumes that income generated by a property will determine the property's value, right? And so these are they would put more weight to this on income producing properties. So we might be talking about apartment buildings, maybe a 2-family, a 3-family, a 10-family, an office building, a retail store, shopping centers, and it's also based on anticipation. So what does that mean, based on anticipation? And that's important to know, because they could say the income approach is based upon the following principles of value. And you need to know that it's based upon anticipation, which means what?
What it will be worth down the road if improvements are made?
Right. Well, not only if improvement, but that anticipating that things will change, right? That the market's always moving. There's always supply and demand. There's always things changing in the marketplace, that the income levels are changing and so forth. So anticipation is important to know, that things are going to change in the market, between supply, between demand, that certain events might occur. Maybe a certain employer might move into the area. Maybe a certain employer might move out of the area. Maybe there's different things that are happening. They're going to build a new stadium. They're going to take down an old beat up warehouse. So that things are going to you're going to be basing it on that things are going to improve or things are not going to improve. Okay. And so again, there's basically 5 steps, right? And so they give you, the meaning your wonderful yellow book, right? They give you an acronym for that. So who knows what's the acronym for the income approach?
Given.
Given, right? And given stands for gross income, vacancy, expenses, and net operating income. Okay, so there's kind of a lot there. So let's talk about it. And then hopefully when you get an opportunity, you're going to be able to actually look at the example in your book and think about things. So the first one is understanding what is the property's annual potential gross income. Right? Now remember, the current rental rates of this particular property may not reflect the market rental rates. So you're going to try to use market rental rates. And if you have a good, let's just say you're thinking about buying this property, if you have a good real estate broker, maybe like this guy that I know, his name is something like Rob Rosa or something, you might want to reach out to him and say, hey, Rob, what are the market rental rates for this particular property and so forth? Right? And so you, especially that's the info that you need to know in order to help you out, right? And you might also be looking at things like, okay, well, are these short-term leases? Are these long-term leases? What is some of the other opportunities that we have here to make money at this property? Like, for instance, can we put some vending machines in there? Can we put parking fees, storage fees, laundry machines? You know, when there was a time when I had washer and dryer in every single one of my properties for rental properties. And I used to love being able to go collect all the quarters and everything. And then all of a sudden, one time I found out that there was this one person who knew how to break into the machine, right? And oh man, that used to drive me crazy. But you know, the whole point is you need to figure out how much can this property really generate for potential gross income. Then you're going to deduct an appropriate allowance for vacancy. So what might be an appropriate allowance for vacancy? Anyone have any ideas?
5%.
So you like 5%. Anyone else? That's bothering me, man. Oof. So I think 5% is pretty good, right? Because remember, you know, depending on the property, people move and all that sort of thing, right? And then also for rent loss, based on, you know, people moving in and moving out, and you miss a month here and there, right? So you're going to deduct the annual operating expenses from the effective gross income to give you the net operating income. Okay. Now remember, when if we were to take a look or think about all the different expenses of a property, is a mortgage payment an expense of a property? Does that help to figure out the value of a property? How much you have to spend on the mortgage?
I would say no.
Why would you say no?
Because it's an automatic charge. It's a cost of doing business.
It could also be variable based on what you're actually ended up having to get the mortgage for. I might put more down or less down.
Right. So and you're both right. So think about it this way. It really doesn't affect the value of the property. You know, Eleanor might go and buy that property putting 100% cash, and that doesn't affect how much it's worth. Ron might go in there putting down 50% down payment. I might go in there trying to put down 10% down payment, right? But all those different mortgage variables, having to pay the principal and interest on a particular property, does not affect its value, right? So remember, those are considered to be debt service, and they're not considered to be operating expenses. So anyways, then what we're going to basically do is we're also going to look at what is the rate of return or percentage, right? No, so for instance, how much would a typical investor pay for the income produced by this particular type and class of property? So this is what estimating the rate of return or yield is. demand for the investment of capital in this property, and that is called the what? The cap rate or capitalization rate, comparing the relationship of income with the sales price of similar properties in the current market area. So what we're saying here is that we use this as a sort of comparison. So if I tell you that this property has a cap rate of 10%, is that good or is that bad? See this house over here, this 4-family, it has a cap rate of 10%. Is that good or is that bad? What would you say?
I'd rather have a lower cap rate.
Okay.
It depends.
It depends. And what does it depend on?
Comparative properties in the area.
That's right. It depends on compared to properties in the area. So if all the other properties in the area are 22% cap rate, this might be a huge value, right? It might be an excellent opportunity. But what if all the other properties in the area are 6-7% cap rate? Then you're like, well, this one, if you were going to buy it, let's say, is kind of a little bit more expensive. Because remember, what you're doing, right, is you are going to take the amount of income, right, and divide it by the cap rate to get you the value. And so if you were to look, in your book, and I know a lot of you don't have that open right now, but technically there's 3 different equations that are here to help you figure this out when it comes to income properties. And if you know 2 out of the 3 numbers, you're always able to figure out the 3rd. So example, the 3 numbers that we're always talking about is income, cap rate, and the value. So let's say you don't understand, well, what would the value of the property be? So you'd figure out, okay, well, here's how much the income is, divide that by the cap rate of what's going on with that property or in the neighborhood. That's going to give you the value. Make sense? The second one, okay, we know that the property brings in this much income, divided by the value of the property of maybe how much they're asking or what we think it's worth. Here's what the cap rate is. Or the third one, let's say we don't know how much income the property is bringing in or how much money, how much it should. So if we say, well, the property is worth this amount of money times this cap rate, here's how much the income is or should be. So who has questions on that sort of thing? Because it does get a little bit tricky, but you really just have to remember kind of the basics about it. You probably get maybe 4, I'm going to guesstimate 4 or 5 questions on your state exam about this unit, maybe 6. But you need to know the basics of each one. It's not like you're going to necessarily have to understand every particular detail about being an appraiser. So you need to know about given. You need to know that the income approach uses a cap rate. You need to know how that cap rate is used in taking a look at, well, how much the value of the property is or should be, how much income maybe the property should be bringing in. And it's really all about knowing what the cap rates are or are for that particular neighborhood or area of location that you're looking at, that you're doing some investigating on. So who has questions on the income approach so far? Because we got a couple more things to go over when we talk about income approach. Does everyone feel comfortable? All right, so it's time to do some math. So first we get to do one together. Don't think you get off that easy. Come on, you think I'm just gonna keep on rolling? All of you are like looking at me like, oh yeah, we're just flying right through this. So we can't do that. We gotta do a little bit of work here. All right, so you might wanna like either take out a pen or paper and your calculator. So let's say an example, right, is, and we'll go right by one that's pretty easy, that this property, we figure out that it brings in $18,000 of income, right? And we know that the cap rate is 9% divided by, I don't know how to do that on my computer keyboard, so I'm going to use that's divided by. This is going to tell us the value, right? $220,000. Everybody find, does everybody understand that? Who has questions on that? So if I was to tell you that this property over here has $22,000 of income, bring it in, right? And the cap rate is 11%. Cap rate, capitalization rate. What is the value of the property?
Hey, Rob,
Yes.
I'm coming up with 200,000.
Yes, same here.
Oh, my fault. You're right. So that's great. Good job. Okay. So what is the value?
$200,000.
Does everybody got that? Right. So what did you do? 22,000 divided by 0.11 or 11%. 200,000. Anyone have any questions on that? So let's do another example, right? Is that if we figure out, okay, the income of this property is 23,000, right? $23,000 of income. And we say that the value is $320,000. What is the cap rate? Anybody know?
13.91%.
So 23,000 divided by 320,000 gives you, what did you get?
7.
Right, 7 point, we could say 2% is the cap rate. Does that make sense? Okay. And again, is that good? Is that bad? What does it depend upon? It depends upon what's going on in the area, right? And so again, here's another one. Let's just say, well, we know that the value of this property is 440,000. And the cap rate is 8%. What's the income of the property?
$35,200.
Right? So basically $35,200. So does that make sense to everyone? Who's got questions on that? So remember, we have to know given, right? We have to know given, which is basically what? The gross income minus the vacancy. We deduct out the vacancy. Then we deduct out the expenses to get the net operating income. And so when we talk about all these things about income, that's what we're talking about, net operating income.
That last one we just did, I did not get that.
What did you get? Did you basically 440,000 times either 8% or 0.08? Should be 35,200, right? Could be me or my calculator, but that's what I got.
Yeah, okay. I didn't put the 0.08.
Right.
I did the point.
Now, so remember, we spent some time on this whole thing about cap rate. Some investors are really into it, right? Some investors are really into this capitalization rate, and they really want to make sure that whatever properties they look at, they understand what the capitalization rate is and so forth. But there's also some investors that are not really they don't really put a lot of priority towards it. And maybe they're more into buying like just residential units, and they look at different numbers, or maybe some of those residential units are just smaller and so forth. So they, of course, you know, the way your yellow book needs to do it, they have to make it maybe a little bit trickier. They got to give you more information to think about and to use in order to take a look at different properties. So the first one is the gross rent multiplier. So who knows what is the gross rent multiplier? Who knows what's the gross rent multiplier? What is that all about?
When you're purchasing a 1 to 4 residential rental property based
Okay.
on the monthly rental income.
All right. So you mentioned 2 very good points. And then what's the gross income multiplier?
The annual income,
And for what kind of?
5 or more units.
Right. So the way that I remember this, I mean, I'm just trying to help you find ways to remember. What seems like a bigger word to you? Rent or income?
Income.
Right? Income. Because rent you pay monthly. And income, when you think about income, a lot of times you're thinking about your annual income. So again, gross rent multiplier, like you had said, right, is helps us to use a rough approximate of value, and it's based upon the monthly, which I should put that in caps, right? Monthly rental income, right? And it's usually for 1 to 4 units. You would use the gross rent multiplier. Whereas gross income multiplier is usually based upon the annual income of a property, and it is for 5 or more units. Make sense? All right, so let's do some of these. So let's say, what is the GRM for a property? Okay, what's the GRM for a property if it recently sold for $162,000, right? And its annual income is $22,000. All right, so who can figure that out? Let me give you a moment. Think about it, and I can promise you it's not only one step. There's 2 steps here. Because we got to get a little tricky with you, right?
Hmm.
All right. So what's the first step that we need to figure out? Anybody
The
know?
monthly income.
That's right, the monthly rental income. So how do we figure that out? We do 22,000, what?
Dividing
Divide by 12.
Divided by 12 equals what? Anybody have that?
1833.
So 22,000 divided by 12 gives you $1,133.33 per month. Monthly, right? So then what's the next step? We take the how much the property sold for, right? Which is recently 162,000. And then we do what?
Divide that by the monthly 1833.
And what do we get?
88.36.
Gives us an 88.36 GRM. Is that good or bad? It depends, right? What's the GRM for the neighborhood? So again, remember, it's the same kind of thing as the cap rate. When you're doing comparisons, you take a look at what's the GRM for each particular one. You know, what is the gross rent multiplier helping to determine the value, right? And so that's when, you know, an appraiser is going to have to look to see, right, if they have, that's when an appraiser is going to look to see if they have comparables of other properties in the neighborhood. And probably about once a week, I get a phone call from some particular appraiser. And they're like, hey, do you know the cap rate of this neighborhood? Or what do you believe it is? Or this property that sold recently, were there any seller credits? Or were there any concessions that maybe are not being put in the public record, so that they can help determine what the value of a property is for a different buyer, okay? And so that's really what we do. We don't get involved in this stuff too much, but if you want to get involved in investing and you want to start building a portfolio, then you get to learn more of these types of things to help you understand, okay, the valuations of properties a little bit better and easier, okay? So basically those three approaches, sales comparison, cost approach, and then income approach, are applied to the same property on every appraisal. And usually, sometimes those three numbers are going to be way off from each other. Sometimes they'll be a little bit close, but a lot of times they're going to be way off. And so then what the appraiser does is what's called a reconciliation, the act of analyzing and effectively weighing the findings of those three approaches, and maybe putting a little discussion as to the data of those particular approaches and which one they're giving the best weight. And they don't use the average, right? They're not going to use the average. They're basically going to say, okay, because of this type of property, because of this particular scenario, you know, it's an income property and it's 4 units and it's this and it's that. So they'll give the income approach usually the greatest weight. You know, it's a museum, it's a school, and there's no income or very little revenue coming from that property. So they'll give it a sales comparison approach and so forth. And so that's basically the final, you know, discussion about appraisals and the unit on appraisals. So what kind of questions do you have when it comes to that? Does anybody have any questions about this unit about real estate appraisals?
For the most part, though, most of this is done for the mortgage. So most of it's generated from the bank. We're involved, or do we get involved with any of the comps, or they're left to pull all that information themselves?
They usually pull it themselves. But again, if you want to take things to the next level, maybe you're really trying to push for a certain valuation, you might meet up with the appraiser at the home if you're the listing agent. Because if you're the buyer or the buyer's agent, it becomes a conflict of interest. But if you're the listing agent, you're going to meet up with that appraiser anyways, usually to let them in the property. And so you might say, hey, here, when I was taking a look at the valuation of this property, here's some of the comps that I use. You might want to take a look at them. And there will be some appraisers that'll say, hey, thanks for that. I appreciate it. I'll take a look at it. And other ones will kind of like look at you like, you know, they already know better and they've already done their research and they don't need that help. But, you know, remember, it's still a human game. It's still a human discussion. There's still some interaction there. Could you put a little bit of influence? And I'm just being straightforward. Can you put a little bit of influence to that appraiser? Like, hey, here's why we priced this property this way. And here's the comps. And here's all the list of the improvements that have been made on the house in the last 4 years since they bought it. And so that's why we priced it over here instead of over here. You know, we know all the comps are here, but they did this, 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 and this. And so you might be able to help the appraiser come to a valuation a little bit easier or understand why you priced it the way that you did. Any other questions? All right, my friends. So now the time is to take out that wonderful piece of paper and a pen, and we are going to get prepared for the quiz. Okay, so here is the quiz. Let's hope for the best. I know there was a lot there, and sometimes it gets a little tough, but let's see how you do. So number one, a property is listed for sale at $235,000. A buyer's offer of $220,000 is rejected by the seller. 6 months later, the seller reduces the price to $225,000. Another buyer offers $210,000, and the seller accepts because the seller has found another house to buy and needs to close quickly. The property is subsequently appraised at $215,000. Which of these figures most accurately represents the property's market value?
B, 2015.
Why
A.
B?
B.
Why B?
Why B? Let me look at my formula.
Huh?
A.
I say A because it's the value, it's what the customer is paid.
All right. So the answer is B. The property's market price is $210,000, while its appraised value and most probable market value, right, is $215,000. And so basically there was no pressure to close on this price, and so that's why it's B, $215,000. All right, number two, which appraisal approach would be best to appraise a 25-year-old owner-occupied house in a 30-year-old neighborhood?
A.
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 A. So remember, because it's residential, that would probably be the best.
A.
Number three, when appraising a new home in which no one has ever lived, an appraiser will likely use the what?
C.
You got it. And will there be any depreciation? Probably not. But because it's brand new construction, right, they might use the cost approach. Number four, assuming that all of the transactions are federally related, which of these properties would not have to be appraised by a state licensed or certified appraiser?
B. B.
Why B?
Below 250,000 or whatever. What's that threshold?
That's right, because it's below 250. Number five, an appraiser's role is to what?
Determine the value.
D.
I know this one's a little bit tricky, but it is D, estimate the value. Number six, the principle that maximum value is realized when land use is in harmony with surrounding standards is what?
B.
B, conformity. You got it. Number seven, a woman plans to build a large house in a neighborhood of smaller homes. So she purchases 3 neighboring lots from their 3 owners. What is the term for the woman's activity?
B, flaggers.
Well, that is technically
D.
B, S,
B.
right. So this is how they get you, right? This is why it gets tricky. The process of doing it is called assemblage. Plottage means that, okay, you're going to take the single larger lot to produce more money rather than the lots being separate. So the way that they say this is because she actually is doing it, it would be D, assemblage. Because it doesn't make sense. I mean, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't say that she's doing these 3 lots to make more money. If she was talking about that, then it would be more of like plottage. I know it's kind of tricky. Hopefully you understand that. Gets a little bit tricky though. So anyway, C is D as in dog. Number 8, what do you like?
Progression.
D.
D,
Progression.
progression, right? The woman's house benefits from being a smaller one alongside more prestigious ones. Number 9, It costs approximately $350,000 to build a house and its various improvements on a parcel of property. If the property was vacant, undeveloped land, it would be worth about $100,000. As it currently exists, the property's physical deterioration equals about $60,000. If an appraiser were to apply the cost approach, what would be the value?
I put B.
You got it. And what did you do?
I took 350,000,
Yep.
subtracted the deterioration 60,000, divided it by 100,000, and I got 390,000.
That's exactly right. All right, so that's how you get that, everyone. So that was a great job if you got that one correct. Number 10, in which approach to value are the square foot method, the unit in place method, and the quantity survey method used? We didn't talk a lot about this, but basically that's the whole thing about the cost approach. Figuring out how much per square foot the property is worth and so forth. So 10 is B as in boy. It should talk a little bit about it in your yellow book. Number 11, air pollution from increased automobile traffic near a building with ornate exterior decoration has dissolved much of the intricate detail work. The cost of restoring the front of the building is roughly 5 times the building's present value. These facts describe what?
C.
C, incurable physical deterioration, right, of the property. Number 12, the land in which the house was built is $50,000. The house was constructed in 1990 at a cost of $265,000 and was expected to last 50 years. Using the straight line method, determine how much the house has depreciated by 2014. And did anybody get this?
C.
It is C. How'd you get it? Do you remember?
Yeah. I just took the 1990 minus the 214. I got that, and then divided it by the 50 years or something. I can't remember exactly, but that's how I got it.
Right. Okay, so you're kind of there. So basically, what are you going to do? You're going to say, okay, 265,000 divided by 50 years equals $5,300 of depreciation per year, right? And then you say, okay, so then it's 5,300 times how many years? Times
14. Oh, 24. Yep.
Charlie. Yep, because the difference between 2014 and 1990. Right, so there's the 24 years. Does everyone get that?
Yep.
You got that one right? That's pretty good for math. All right, number 13. Which of these reports would a salesperson most likely research and deliver to a prospective seller? If you're a good real estate agent, you're going to do that. You're going to put that together and deliver it to them. So that would be A, comparative market analysis. 14, what is the GRM for a residential duplex with a selling price of $234,000 if the monthly rent for each unit is $925? So what are you going to do? You're going to take what? The 234,000, and then how much is the monthly rent? Divided by 2 times $925, right? And that's going to equal what? E is in Charlie. Make sense? All right, 15. Which of these approaches is given the greatest weight in reconciling the appraised value of a 2-bedroom owner-occupied home? What do you like for 15?
Sales comparison is what I had.
You got it. Sales comparison. Number 16, the characteristics of value is dust. And so what is it? A.
A.
17, what do you like? Hit me.
Hey, yeah. The non-utility scarcity.
A house has been on the market for several months because most buyers do not want to walk through the master bedroom to reach another bedroom. So that's a problem with what?
See,
Obsolescence.
Functional obsolescence. It's outmoded. People don't like it anymore. The market is not responding to that. 18, an owner is considering installing a below ground swimming pool, which may cost many thousands of dollars to build. Before he starts, he should consider the concept of what?
Contribution.
C.
D, contribution.
19, which of these formulas is incorrect for the income approach?
C.
D,
Yep.
you got it. That's incorrect. Okay. As the cap rate goes down, the value increases. So cap rate goes down, value increases. Number 20, a house sits on a corner of busy intersection. Two of the corners are occupied by gas stations, and directly across from the house is a fast food restaurant. The house's owners have been told that the property would be worth more if the lot were vacant. So this is an example of what?
B.
B.
Yep, best and highest and best use. It'd be used better if it was that. All right, 21. A 2-unit apartment building is being appraised. In this neighborhood, the accepted gross rent multiplier, the GRM, is 144. The annual income is $16,800, both units rented. The monthly expenses are $300. Based on the income approach, what is the estimated market value of the building? So the first thing you have to figure out is what? You have to figure out the monthly rental income. So you're going to do what? 16,800 divided by 12, and that's going to give you $1,400 of income per month, right? And then what are you going to do?
Minus the 300.
Okay. Well, do we deal with expenses when we talk about the GRM? No. When we talk about GRM, that's not included in the calculation. So that's why you do, that's the trick of it. That's why you do 1,400 times what? 144, and that gives you what? A is an apple.
A.
See, that's the trick part of it. You don't include that in the GRM. All right. I know a lot of you don't like that one. You're like, oh man, they're just trying to trick you. Yeah, they are. Number 22, an apartment building has $65,000 in potential gross annual income. The vacancy rate is estimated at 5%. Total operating expenses are $29,000 and the cap rate is 9%. Using the income approach, what is the value of the building? So again, remember, when we talk about income, we talk about given, right? Gross income minus vacancy and rent minus expenses equals net, right? So basically, gross income is 65,000. Okay, times the 5%, which is the vacancy. And so we got to get that. And so that comes out to be what, 3,250. So now we're going to do 65,000, 65K minus $3,250. Right. And then we're going to minus what? Operating expenses, right? Which is 29,000. And that's going to give us what? Anybody get it? 32,750. Did everyone get that?
Yep.
And then divide
And then divide that by what?
9%.
9%. And that's going to give you what?
363,889.
All right. I'll tell you, this is probably one of the hardest questions when it comes to the math, but you see, it's not really that hard if you remember given. And that's why you have to remember those acronyms. Gross income minus the variable expenses and net equals net operating income, right? So that's the whole point. Minus vacancy, expenses equals net operating income. So that one's pretty tricky. And if you got that, great job. All right, let's rock and roll. 23, what do you like?
C,
D, right? Every appraisal, highest and best use. 24, the property being appraised is called the what?
D,
C,
The subject property. That's always the property that's being appraised. 25, an empty lot is located in a neighborhood of single family homes. It is the only lot in this well-maintained neighborhood. A busy street with many stores is located 3 blocks away. An industrial area is about 6 blocks away. What is the probable highest and best use?
D,
Single family.
D. Most likely in demand the most. 26, what is the process for creating a BPO?
A,
You got it. Drive by the property. Sometimes you got to go inside, take a bunch of pictures usually, and fill out the BPO form. Right. 27, which of these is not an essential element of, or not an essential assumption in determining market value?
D.
You got
A.
it.
I put
A.
D,
It doesn't have to be on the market for 3 months. That doesn't make sense. 28, the principle of value, that is the interaction of supply and demand, is called a what?
Competition.
D,
Got it. Competition. 29, all of these reflect basic principles of value except
D,
D. That's right. Financing concessions has nothing to do with value. And then 30, touching up peeling paint is an example of what?
A.
A.
A. So each one is worth about 3.5 points, my friends. You did pretty good. I'm hoping that you're happy with your score. If not, you know what you need to do. You need to just study a little bit more. But hopefully you're getting yourself an 80% or better.